Everybody's attention, please. Good afternoon, everyone. If I could have everybody's attention, that'd be great. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say welcome and happy Wednesday here in Albany. Well, as you know, it's budget month is upon us. We've had a variety of different public hearings over the last several weeks. Heard from lots of people from across the state on a variety of different topics about any concerns regarding Governor Cuomo's budget. And of course, there were a lot of concerns about what's been addressed, what's not been addressed. And of course, we always talk about two of the largest topics, education and healthcare, which is always a conversation piece when it comes to finalizing a state budget, and that will continue. But there's some subjects that we believe need a little bit more of attention with the governor and the two majorities. I know we should be seeing their one House resolutions in the next few weeks, but certainly I'm also guessing right now they've been meeting behind closed doors and not letting the public know the context of those conversations. So what we're here about today is to talk about some additional budget priorities on behalf of the Assembly Republican Conference, and you're going to be hearing from a variety of our different members on different topics, which I'll be introducing them along the way. But I think it's important to point out that, you know, unfortunately, the closed-door budget approach still continues, and that's obviously a disappointment. For years, we've been saying that minorities in both houses of the legislature should be part of these budget discussions. And that's when Republicans were in power in the Senate, and the Assembly Democrats obviously have been in the majority. But over the last couple of years, the new majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, has been saying the minorities, both houses, should be included in the budget discussions. For some strange reason, she's now gone silent about that, and I'm actually personally disappointed about that, because I think that if it was right for the minorities to be in the budget discussions, public budget discussions, when she was the minority leader, she certainly should be advocating and speaking to that and demanding that Governor Cuomo have all minority conferences as part of these open discussions. And in the end, ladies and gentlemen, it's about the voices of our constituents from across the state. Our conference represents every region of the state, from Buffalo to Long Island, and certainly the millions of New Yorkers that we represent want to make sure their voices are heard. We know how to count votes, that's not a big secret, but I don't think it hurts to listen to our constituents and us as representatives for constituents in Albany. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, some of these priorities that we think need more attention, don't have enough attention, or little discussion in the public eye about some of these topics. So I'm going to kick this off and introduce Assemblywoman Mary Beth Walsh, who's going to talk about our libraries and the precious resource that they are. Mary Beth?
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon. I can't think of a less partisan issue than libraries. I'm the former ranker on the Libraries and Education Committee, Education Technology Committee. As I've been talking to the different libraries, not only in my district, but also today is also the NYLA Rally Day, they're very disheartened by the governor's decision to every year pull away aid, and then at the last minute it seems to get put back in, but it causes a lot of stress and anxiety on the part of the libraries and the library system. So what NYLA is asking for, they're calling for a $200 million increase for statewide library aid. The 2018-19 enacted budget included $96.6 million in library aid, a $1 million increase from the previous year, which could be considered a win, but is not still in line with funding from the early 2000s. And NYLA is calling for $75 million for library capital infrastructure improvements, because a lot of our libraries are starting to really age. And the other thing is that libraries are really changing. It's less about books on the shelf. It's more about Wi-Fi connectivity. You know, libraries now in our communities are a really central hub to the community in a way that it's really unprecedented. So they're vibrant. It's a place where it's a great equalizer. People from all walks of life can come into a library, get Wi-Fi connectivity, learn about basic computer literacy, as well as all the other things that libraries have always offered. So I think that as we take a look at the stagnant funding that we've had in previous years, it disproportionately impacts economically disadvantaged communities, and that widens the digital divide. So I do think that, and I believe our conference believes, that this is something that the governor should be paying more attention to, and in the One House budgets, please, let's get this funding restored to our libraries so that they can continue to provide the excellent services that they do provide to our communities. So, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mary Beth. Next, I'd like to welcome to the podium Assemblyman Colin Schmitt, who's going to talk about the property tax cap.
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon. It is beyond time that we ensure that in this budget process, we guarantee for all New Yorkers, regardless of where in New York State they might live, a permanent property tax cap. All New Yorkers deserve the right to live, work, and prosper here in a state that is known as the Empire State, but the onerous tax burden and cost of living burden that is placed on New Yorkers from Montauk to Buffalo, New York City, all the way north to the Canadian border is too much for so many of our friends, family, neighbors to bear. That's why we see day after day so many of them being forced to flee south and west to states with more welcoming business climates, more welcoming affordability. And that's unacceptable. The Republican conference here, we're leading the charge to ensure that the property tax cap is made permanent. In New York State history, it has been single-handedly the most successful measure which was started out of this conference to stem the growth of property taxes and the cost and the burdens that place on taxpayers. So this is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is not a downstate versus upstate issue. This is an issue for all New Yorkers. If we cannot afford to live here, to enjoy all the great things that New York has to offer, then there's nothing left for our state. So it's time for all parties and all levels of state government to get together. We must make this property tax cap permanent. We're unified, and we're calling for Democrats and Republicans in both chambers and the governor's office. Let's get together and let's get this done. Let's declare a victory for every man, woman, and child that we represent. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. And now I'd like to welcome Assemblywoman Missy Miller to talk about direct care.
Good afternoon. I'm Missy Miller. I represent the 20th District, but I also proudly represent the population of individuals who are some of the most vulnerable in our state. We're calling on Governor Cuomo to include in his final budget a living wage for the direct care workers. I can't begin to fathom why there is even such a wage disparity in the first place. Let's be honest here. These direct care workers are doing a job that nobody wants to do. It can be very physical work, like lifting someone in and out of a wheelchair, often adult-sized people or long and lanky kids like my son. Many need complete, total care for all of their daily activities, like bathing, toileting, dressing, eating, they give medications, they operate medical equipment. Many need one-on-one constant supervision for dangerous behaviors or self-injurious behaviors. This is truly highly skilled and challenging work. How do we expect to attract workers into this service field when the work itself is so challenging, both physically and emotionally, and the pay is far below what every other job offers? And there haven't even been any cost of living adjustments at all since 2010. This has created a tremendous turnover rate in this field, which has reached crisis proportions. It can take weeks or more to adequately train a direct care worker. It takes time for them to learn somebody's routine. They form relationships with these individuals and their families. When they have to then leave after such a short time because they can't afford to work for the wages that our state offers, it's traumatic and detrimental. Governor Cuomo made a very big public promise about how much he cared about this population and how it was about time that we started paying them a fair wage. His big speech included phrases like, There's no reason why a person working in a fast food restaurant should make more than the direct care workers. We agree. So why is he not including funding in his budget to increase the salaries to provide a living wage to direct care workers? These people are doing God's work, caring for our loved ones. Governor Cuomo's own special advisor on vulnerable persons, Clarence Sundrum, stated, "One might summarize the job description of the direct support worker as requiring the wisdom of Solomon, the patience of Job, and the caring of Florence Nightingale." Do the right thing, Governor Cuomo.
Thank you, Missy. Thank you, Missy. Now I'd like to introduce Assemblyman Kevin Byrne to talk about middle-class tax cuts.
Thank you, Leader and colleagues, for attending this afternoon. As the Leader said, my name is Assemblyman Kevin Byrne. I represent Westchester and Putnam counties, and I'm here today to talk about the importance of continuing the promise for middle-class tax relief to so many hardworking New Yorkers. As legislators, we have a responsibility to serve the people that elected us, and right now we're facing a challenge in New York State where we see so many people fleeing our state because of the cost of living, and it's just it's in many cases unaffordable. In 2016, Albany finally took a much-needed step to put more money back into the pockets of families and hardworking New Yorkers. This middle-class tax cut helped relieve the pressure facing residents who had been paying too much for far too long. We must ensure this tax cut is fully implemented without delay or interruption by fiscal year 2024 to 2025, as it was initially intended. This plan has the potential to provide $4.2 billion in tax relief for the hardworking residents of the state, and they deserve it. New York cannot afford to waver from this commitment as thousands of residents continue to flee the state. This tax cut was a step in the right direction, and I'm urging all of our colleagues, leaders, the governor, to recognize the importance of this tax cut, continue it, and make sure this remains a priority in the upcoming budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Now to welcome up Assemblyman Phil Palmesano to talk about one of his favorite subjects, chips.
Yes, and I'm not talking about potato chips either. It's a privilege for me to be here today with our conference to continue our call to strengthen the state's commitment and partnership to help fund our local roads and bridges and culverts through increased funding for the CHIPS program and the Extreme Winter Recovery Program. Our ask is a $150 million increase in the CHIPS program base aid, which has been flat for the past 7 years, and also to restore the $65 million in winter recovery funds that the governor has cut from this budget, which with the weather we're seeing going on around the state lately and again today, why cut that funding? I don't know. It would be devastating to our local communities. We know that the MTA is in crisis. Our roads and bridges along New York State have problems. We don't want to be in a crisis like the MTA. That's why critical investment is needed. And the MTA, we know, is the lifeblood of transportation system downstate. But I will emphasize that the CHIPS program is the lifeblood for many of our upstate and communities all around the state. In some cases, the CHIPS funding is the only dollars that local communities had to fund fixing their local roads, bridges, and culverts. It's justified. Why is it justified? 87% of the roads driven are owned. 87% of the roads in New York State are owned and maintained by our local municipalities. 52% of the 18,000 bridges are owned and maintained by our local municipalities, and 48% of the miles driven are driven on local roads. The need is there. The comptroller has a recent report just talk on the bridge deficiencies and repairs that are needed. $27 billion on the local bridges that are needed for repair, and billions of dollars in needs along our roadways. So you may ask how you pay for this. I got two specific examples I can point to. One, we collect over $4.7 billion in driver-related fees annually. Some of these fees and taxes that I think most people would think that should be going to fix their infrastructure. Well, it all doesn't. Only out of that 4.7, only $2 billion is going for capital. We should be dedicating that other money, those fees, to capital. And also look at the governor's own proposed budget. He's calling for $150 billion in infrastructure improvements, $66 billion in new investments for transportation. Why not make upstate, or not just upstate, the entire state, our local roads and bridges be a commitment in this process? there's enough money to do that and make sure we're funding our local infrastructure, our roads, bridges, and culverts. This is a safety issue. We need to be proactive and not reactive. How many of us put our kids on a school bus every morning going over a local road or bridge? God forbid we have a tragedy and our first responders trying to get to emergencies. It's a safety issue. It's economic development. When we do this work, local contractors hire local employees, which are local jobs, and helps our local economy. Businesses locate in towns, villages, and cities, so it's great to have an interstate, but you need a good local infrastructure in place for economic development and economic activity. And also, this is about the property taxpayer. Our local property taxpayers deserve to have some of their state dollars come back to their local community to fix their local roads. And every dollar we invest in the CHIPS program is $1 that the local property taxpayer doesn't have to pay in increased property taxes. It's the right thing to do, so we're asking the governor and the leadership in both houses and the Assembly and Senate to increase funding to the CHIPS program because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Bill. Now I'd like to introduce Assemblyman Will Barclay to talk about unfunded mandates and saving the taxpayer.
Well, thank you, Leader. As you mentioned, I'm here to talk about unfunded mandates. Just a way of background, my father served in the legislature for 20 years, and he was first elected in 1964. I was elected in 2002, and I remember one of the cornerstones of my campaign, I said, Dad, this is great. I'm hearing from a lot of locals, unfunded mandates. I'm going to make that the cornerstone of my campaign. And my father said, that's great, kid. I ran on the same thing back in 1964. So you can see we've had this problem with unfunded mandates for a long time, and unfortunately it's just getting worse instead of better. In fact, between 2001 and 2018, the New York State Assembly has voted 209 times on legislation that would impose $138 billion in unfunded mandates on local governments. And of course, you know, counties in New York are required to pay more for more than 40 state mandated programs using local tax dollars. The largest 9 state mandates consume 90% of the local property taxes outside of New York City. And Medicaid continues to be the largest unfunded mandate from the state, consuming 47 cents of every dollar. And we have a little dollar sign here, and you can see all the mandates. Sorry about that. But really, it's 90%, and you can see only 1% is left for optimal spending. So you can see the consequences of unfunded mandates on our localities. Sure. Unfortunately, as you all know, the governor included no new or broad-based mandate relief for local governments. In fact, he's gone just the opposite way. As you know, he made a cut to the AIM funding, and then instead of restoring the cut in his 30-day amendments, he went even farther and said the counties now have to make up the difference for their localities within the counties. That's going to be a $59 million hit, I think, to the counties. In our conference, obviously, we continue to advocate for mandate relief. We believe this relief should have been coupled back in 2011 with the property tax cap. Unfortunately, we still haven't seen that coupling. And today, we're requesting meaningful, broad-based mandate relief for local governments be included in the final state budget this year, including the state taking over the local share of Medicaid. That'd be huge, at 47 cents. So I appreciate the leader in this conference, the leadership you've shown on funded mandates, and we're going to make this fight a real fight come this April. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Will. Now I'd like to welcome up Assemblyman Chris Friend to talk about small business.
Thank you, Leader. It's no secret that New York State has some of the highest property taxes, some of the highest utility rates, highest workers' compensation rates, and the highest labor mandates that continue to grow with each session that we're here. For these reasons, New York State has to reach out to the big corporations. For example, Solar City in Buffalo. Almost $1 billion spent for a plant that sits idle, vacant, has to loan out the space in order to try to start to even come close to meeting their employment goals. And then you have a photonics plant in Syracuse. Almost $90 million spent building, fitting that plant with machinery, and then we go ahead and sell that for $1 to Onondaga County. And then, of course, the latest example, Amazon. What a fiasco that just created. A loss of 15,000 to 40,000 jobs for the entire region and the state of New York. What other company is going to want to look now that the rug's been pulled out from a big corporation like that? Why are they going to want to come to New York State? Well, we don't have to draw these big corporations to New York State. We have the resources right here in our small businesses. For that reason, we employ the Small Business Full Employment Act. This act would go ahead and reduce the corporate tax rate from 6.5% to 2.5%. It would increase the personal income tax exemption to 15%. It would add tax credits for our small businesses for employee retention, employee new hires, and tuition assistance. And it would also allow for a tax amnesty plan for those small businesses that have difficulty complying with all the burdensome regulations and tax compliance issues in New York State. If we can supply $420 million for Hollywood in tax credits, why can't we do that same thing for our small businesses that employ half of the private sector in New York State? Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Chris. Now I'd like to welcome Assemblyman Dan Stec. Again, aid to municipalities.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with my colleagues today talking about something that impacts state property taxpayers all over. And it's the aid to municipalities cut that the governor proposed. Roughly $700 million in a $175 billion state budget. The governor's budget proposal reducing that by $59 million. And when you do the analysis of what towns and villages are affected by that, 89% of the towns in New York State and 83% of the villages will see their aid to municipalities funding eliminated. These are potholes, these are parks and rec programs, these are positions. This is the most visible and most important level of government to most people is what they see out of their local government. And this is an added burden that the governor has proposed putting on the local taxpayer as we look to rightfully make the tax cap permanent. We are simultaneously, with the governor's proposal, looking to make it that much more difficult. It's another unfunded mandate. My personal background, this is my 7th year in the Assembly, but before that I was a town supervisor for 9 years. I've prepared town budgets, I prepared county budgets. I know I was there when the state tax cap was implemented. And I can tell you that the aid to municipalities impacts a tremendous amount of what the budgets can and can't do at the local level. And I think to add further lunacy to the suggestion was at the outcry that was received by the proposal from local government, the governor's 30-day amendment solution is barely a solution at all, because what he's done is he's proposed that the counties make the towns and villages whole from their sales tax revenue. So again, the state is going to take the money away, and when the local municipalities scream at the importance of that cut and how much it hurts their local taxpayer, the governor's proposed solution is to take it from the other pocket of the same local taxpayer. It's $59 million cut on a $175 billion state budget. We're doing a lot more for illegals than $59 million. So I propose that the governor rethink that and restore the AIM program the way it always has been. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I'd like to now bring up Assemblyman Joe Giglio, and we're going to be discussing prison closures.
Good afternoon. I guess the question that we asked as a conference is, what changed in 3 weeks? 3 weeks ago, when the governor submitted his budget, corrections was funded with an increase. 3 weeks later, it has been decreased, and there will be approximately 3 prison closings of his choosing. During the hearings, nothing was mentioned about that, so as a conference, we want to know why. We want to have hearings. We need to know what the statistics are and why you would want to do this. We do know certain things. We do know that it usually takes a year before you can close a facility by law, and he's claiming it's 60 days. We also know that the increases in crime within our own facilities, both inmate on inmate and inmate on correction officers, both the women and men that work there, both staffs of civilians too, have increased over the years. We know that there's double bunking, and somehow that never comes to fruition. So you tell me where we find 3 prisons to close and keep the public and our people working in those facilities safe. And all we have to do is look to Clinton just a few years ago when we spent approximately, $7 million, if not more, to get 2 escaped murderers back in our custody. Well, at least one got back in our custody and the other one is deceased. Let's look at all those things before we have a knee-jerk reaction and a misguided notion that we can save $3 billion out of the deficit that's occurring now and say we can do that off the men and women that work inside our facilities and the public that deserves to be secure and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome up Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis to talk about TAP and student assistance.
Thank you very much, Leader.
Thanks.
I first want to thank the Leader for including New York City in that property tax cap, something that the Governor said was not a burden shared by the people of New York City, and certainly I disagree with that, so thank you, Leader, for including New York City. The issue of tuition assistance is one that I've been pushing now for at least 5 years. When we look at the current tuition assistance program, if you are a graduate student in the state of New York, you have not received tuition assistance since the year 2010. You do not qualify since the year 2010, when the majority cut the funding, when we drove us into a deficit, which led cuts to the funding. If you are a household income of $81,000 or more, you do not qualify for any tuition assistance in the state of New York. Because we have not modernized that schedule of household income since the year 2000. It's been 19 years since we have increased the income eligibility to qualify for TAP, and I find that to be unconscionable. It's one of the reasons why we see so many of our young people graduating with a tremendous amount of debt. As a matter of fact, when you look at the graduate and undergraduate debt combined, on average, it's about $57,000 for the class of 2012, probably more so for the classes that have graduated since then. So I find it unconscionable that the Assembly and the Senate both passed the DREAM Act. Once again, this seems to be the priority every single year, to pass the DREAM Act that would give free college, city and state free college, as well as access to the tuition assistance program for those who are in the country illegally, yet we're not taking care of those citizens and legal residents who are struggling with a tremendous amount of debt, and families who are working multiple jobs to put their children or put themselves through school. So our proposal would be to increase that income cap to $125,000. Again, it has not been increased since the year 2000, so we're talking about making it up now for 19 years. So we believe $125,000 would allow many more middle-class families that we represent to qualify for the tuition assistance program. And additionally, we want to see the tuition assistance program restored for graduate students, which have not had any access to it since the year 2000. And also, we want to help people pay off their student loans. And we believe one solution to that would be reducing the taxable income for individuals with student loans. So single filers would see their taxable increase go down $4,000, and head of household filers can receive up to $6,000, and married filers can receive up to $8,000. We believe that that would go a really long way in helping ease the loan debt burden on our families, and as well as help those young people and not so young people who want to achieve a college education or go to graduate school, become lawyers, doctors, engineers, teachers, whatever they want to become, pay their way to get there. So thank you very much, Leader, for including this in our conference's position for the budget.
Thanks, Nicole. So we believe that these are real solutions for our state. Ideas that need to be vetted, that need to be heard, that need to be discussed, and quite frankly, voted on. And we're talking about the overall picture here is about helping people afford to live and work in New York State on all of these issues. And certainly, again, we'll have to wait to see what the two majorities' budget resolutions, one House resolutions will say in a couple weeks. But certainly, we are going to continue our advocacy for not only these issues, but ongoing discussions about education and healthcare and what's being done. Disparity in funding in schools is an issue, and that's why these discussions should be in public. What is the rationale for changing school aid formulas? What's the rationale for cutting funding for our hospitals and nursing homes? These are important issues to the people we represent, as well as these issues we're outlining today. So we're going to continue to have these advocacy meetings, press releases, conversations with our colleagues because it's so important, because it's really about our state. It's about the people that we represent in our state, and it's about listening to them. And that's what we're all about. That's what we'll continue to do. And I just want to thank the entire conference for all of their hard work. And all of these proposals come from our conference, from the members of the conference. And we don't do this alone. We do this as a team. And certainly, and we have all sorts of additional ideas that you don't have enough time to listen to today, with lots of legislation, lots of public policy solutions. It's not about saying no, it's about offering better ideas, and I think that we do that. So with that, I want to say thank you and then take any questions anybody has.
Do you have an idea overall of what this budget proposal does to affordability in New York State?
Well, I'll give you a general sense. I don't think it reduces the cost of living in New York State or owning a business. And all you have to even look at whether the budget grows 2%, or if you do the real math on what's been shifted around in the shell game, it's a much greater spending plan than that. So if you just look, has New York State's budget ever been reduced or held even from one year to the next? The answer is no. So that means you have to pay for it somehow, and that means taxes, or driving up some sort of revenue scheme or stream to pay for it. So do I think that this budget is really affordable? The answer is no. But we never also, Mike, we never have any conversation about how can we deliver services better, more efficient. There's never conversations about that. And, you know, there's been talk about Medicaid for years, as an example, that there's an estimated $4.5 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, that's a lot of money. And certainly, whenever you look at any state agency, have they been doing any consolidations? There's never any discussion about that. So I think it can be more affordable, but not based on the outline that I've seen in this budget and, quite frankly, prior budgets. Anybody else? Rock and roll. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.